Well, welcome again to our YouTube channel as we are going through the Gospel of Matthew and the whole New Testament. This is our first book of the New Testament, and we're continuing today in Matthew chapter 14. Thanks for joining us. The revelation of Jesus to his disciples did not come all at once. Progressively, they understood just who Jesus was, and the more they came to know him, the more they trusted him, and the easier it was to surrender their lives to him. Jesus had sent the 12 out to the cities of Israel to preach the good news. After they returned, King Herod heard of the miracles that Jesus was doing and thought that he was John the Baptist, raised from the dead. We continue now in Matthew 14, verse 13. When Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. When Jesus heard this report about Herod, he left the area and took his disciples to a deserted place on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now, Mark gives us more details. Jesus said, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat." Jesus called his disciples aside for a retreat because they had worked so hard, but the crowds did not want to leave them alone. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. Now, this is the second time in Matthew's gospel we are told that Jesus was moved with compassion when he saw the people. You know, if it were me, I probably would have been upset. Like, I wanted to go on this retreat, and now what? More people, But not Jesus. This word moved with compassion literally means to have one's inner being stirred. It is a visceral response to human needs. And if we have the same love of Christ in us, then we will also be moved with compassion over the needs of others. Now, when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." The disciples saw the problem. It was late. There were lots of people with no way to feed them all. And there were no local fast food shacks. Obviously, Jesus needed to send the people away so they could go buy food before the villages closed. But Jesus told them they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. Jesus wanted them to see the situation through eyes of faith. They saw it as a problem to be avoided rather than as an opportunity to be seized. And they said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, "Bring them here to me." Now, John tells us that it was Andrew who found a boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. Then Andrew said, "But what are they among so many?" That is how most of us would think. We would see the great need and our insufficient resources. What do we have to offer in comparison to the greatness of the need? But the Lord wants us to view our problems not according to our own insufficiency, but according to his sufficiency. Hudson Taylor, founder of the China Inland Missions in the 19th century, said this: "Impossible, difficult, done." And Jesus said, "Bring them here to me." Now that is a recipe for a miracle. Whatever we have, we must put it into the hands of God. Moses had a staff, but in the hands of God, it became a mighty instrument to deliver the people from Egypt. What do you have that you can put into the hands of Jesus? Your talent, your time, your resources, your brokenness? Ah, yes, even brokenness is something valuable and useful in the hands of Jesus. But will you offer it all to him? Will you consecrate yourself? Whatever you have, bring it to Jesus and watch what he does. Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So we see four things here. First, the Lord prepared everyone for what he was about to do. Second, he took what was given him and looked up to heaven. This was an act of thanksgiving. It was the recognition that every good and every perfect gift comes from the Father. And then he blessed the food. Third, he broke the loaves and the fish, multiplying them in his hands. And that is what Jesus does with everything entrusted to him. He blesses, then he breaks, and then he multiplies it to feed the many. And fourth, the disciples distributed the food to the multitudes. Now that's the pattern. We can only give out what we first receive from the Lord. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The word filled here means to be completely satisfied. They all ate to their heart's content, and there were 12 baskets of leftovers, one for each disciple. They only counted the 5,000 men, but there were likely a total of 10 to 15,000 people that day. The disciples were so impressed with this miracle that all four gospel writers recorded it. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there. John tells us that after this miracle, the multitudes wanted to make Jesus king by force. Jesus met their physical needs, and they wanted an earthly kingdom. But that was not why Jesus came to the world. So Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and cross over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He did not want them to be influenced by this hysteria. They already struggled enough with their own ambitions about an earthly kingdom. Then Jesus dismissed the crowd along with their efforts to make him king. He did not come to satisfy their dreams, but to do his Father's will. Then he went up on the mountain to pray by himself. It had been a long day, and rather than seeking sleep like probably most of us would do, Jesus sought the strength and wisdom of his Father. If Jesus found it necessary to get alone with God to pray, then how much more should we, who are so weak on our own, seek God in prayer? But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Meanwhile, the disciples met a great storm on the sea. In our spiritual lives, there are two kinds of storms. First, there are those storms we make by our own disobedience. If we sow to the flesh, we reap corruption. If we sow the wind, we reap the whirlwind. God does not allow his people to sin successfully. Second, there are storms that God allows for our own testing and training. Such was this storm in the lives of the disciples. They obeyed Jesus, and then came the storm. But soon they would learn that Jesus is the Lord of the storm. Now, in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. The fourth watch of the night was from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. That tells us that Jesus did not come right away. He allowed them to go through this storm for a while before he came to them. He told them to go to the other side, but would they believe in him despite this dangerous storm? This also tells us that Jesus will overcome any obstacle to get to his people who are in need. No one would have expected Jesus to walk on water, but he overcame this natural obstacle to deliver his disciples. And we must also know that he will overcome all of the forces against us to save us. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." The Greek word translated ghost is phantasma, which means a shadowy apparition. This was all too much for them to handle, so they cried out in fear. But they could take courage because Jesus was with them. And if Jesus is with us, then it doesn't matter what is against us. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. Now, why did Peter want to walk out to Jesus? Was it to be closer to him? Was it to experience walking on water for himself? Was it to prove to the other guys that he was not afraid? We don't know. But by asking this question, Peter did exercise faith. Was it risky? Absolutely. But if we will not take risks, then we can never be successful. So Jesus said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on water to go to Jesus. Now, why did Jesus tell Peter to come? There was no practical reason for this. He wasn't going to go preaching to the fish. I believe that the Lord wanted to show Peter the power of faith. Like a father encouraging his child to take his first steps, Jesus encouraged Peter to take these steps of faith, and Peter did it. Hey, look, Mom, I'm walking on water. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. Peter probably thought, what am I doing out here? I could drown. And then he started to sink. It was his faith in Jesus that sustained him. But as soon as he took his eyes off Jesus and saw the obstacles, he doubted. But at least Peter knew who to call. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. This was a gentle rebuke. Peter, you were doing so well. What happened? Why did you doubt? There was a great lesson here that would prove useful to Peter in the future. Don't live in denial of the obstacles, but see them in relationship to Jesus and never take your eyes off him. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshiped him, saying, Truly, you are the Son of God. At this point, a switch flipped in the minds of the disciples. They realized that Jesus was not only a great teacher and miracle worker, but he was also the Son of God. And they would never be the same. Have you come to this same conclusion about Jesus Christ? Well, thank you again for joining us. I would encourage you to please subscribe to our channel. That really does help us a lot if you are enjoying these broadcasts. Thank you for watching. May God bless.